Greetings, I'm Deborah Vorhies. I'm the CEO of FairWild Foundation, which is a private voluntary standard organization for wild harvested plant ingredients, and interim COO of AWEI, the African Wildlife Economy Institute. So what are we trying to do here today? At AWEI, we take a landscape view to conservation in Africa, and we say, how can we enable conservation, economic inclusion, climate resilience, and social well-being at a landscape level through thriving wildlife economies? Well, yes, of course, we think we can do this, but how do we enable those thriving wildlife economies? And how do we do this enabling through the use of private voluntary standards? So the first question, of course, is what is a voluntary sustainability standard, a private voluntary standard? Well, these are standards that enable any particular product to meet very specific economic, social, and environmental sustainability metrics at every level across the value chain. And I think that's what's really, really important. So why do we have them? We have them because they have the potential to ensure the kinds of outcomes that I mentioned in the beginning, those conservation, climate resilience, inclusion, economic inclusion, social well-being. They have the potential to ensure that those outcomes are gained as we go forward in the wildlife economy. And how they do that is by providing verified assurance at each step along the value chain. In other words, from the moment that you harvest that pelargonium or you shoot that gazelle, all the way through to the moment at which the consumer buys the product in the grocery store or in the butcher or in the pharmacy, at every stage, all the way along, there has been a third-party verified assurance to say that those benefits will be obtained. And the second big outcome of having these private voluntary standards across the whole value chain is that they enable entire markets to shift. Now, we have to bear in mind that if we follow the business process from the pelargonium in South Africa to the tea or whatever product or the little tablet that somebody takes in Germany, that this is a global world. And in this global world of business, there aren't really political boundaries that are effective. Goods and services move across those boundaries. And that's why these standards are best used as private voluntary standards, as long as you have that verified assurance at each step. And that enables an entire market to shift to sustainability. It's tremendously important. Now, sustainability standards have been around for a long time. And there is an enormous market in them already. The ITC provides this map of over 300 sustainability standards, in fact, mostly around organic products and things like that, but you can search for them. It's a tremendously useful map because you can search by the type of product or the place it is or whatever. But the fundamental point is, out of that 300 plus set of standards that you can look at, how many pertain to the wildlife economy? Not many. Many of the organic standards that are there certainly include a component for wild harvesting. But the thing is that wildlife economy goods have a special relationship with nature. We are not merely, as in the organic world, trying to eliminate pesticides and do less harm to nature. We have a positive relationship with nature. Through the sustainable use of wildlife products, whether they be animals, plants, mopani, worms, honey, or whatever, through that sustainable use, we are actively, supporting a positive relationship with nature through conservation, through climate resilience, through economic inclusion, and through social well-being. And that's why it's really important and necessary to have these particular standards that focus on wildlife products. Now, the thing is, okay, we need to design and create all these wildlife certification systems. It's not an easy thing to do. There are a number of elements that you do need to think about. The one is, who sets that standard and oversees the certification? And how are stakeholders consulted? Does it have some kind of legitimacy in the marketplace? Does it have legitimacy in the conservation space? It's important to think about these things. You can't come from nowhere and just do this. You have to enjoy the confidence of the stakeholders and the people you're trying to sell to. What is the scope of application? What environmental, social, and economic requirements are covered by the standard? So, for example, this is where we are different to organic. Organic says you mustn't use pesticides. But when you're talking about harvesting gazelle or you're talking about harvesting wild licorice, well, what matters? Does it matter that this is an endangered species? Does it matter how it is harvested? Those are the things that come into being there. And even the economic elements are very, very different, because people that do wild harvesting are often not sort of agricultural workers employed. They may be self-employed. They may be at a very low level in society. What protections do we need to build in for them? The third element to look at is how a company can gain access into your standard and evolve over time. What level of compliance is needed to get first level certification, and how can you help them and support them to build and improve their performance over time? The element of verification is very, very important. Who checks compliance? How is it checked? How is it certified? What is the audit process? We're very accustomed to auditing in the financial world, but how do we translate this effectively to the world of conservation? The issue of traceability is also very, very important, because this is what we call over the whole chain of custody. There are different players and different actors and different companies all the way along, from the person that first does the harvesting to the sorting and the production and the packaging and the shipping, all the way through to the consumer who is buying the licorice tea on the supermarket shelf. Well, how do they know that everything's been complied with all the way along? And that is what is so important, to ensure that this genuineness, this compliance, is all the way along the chain of custody. And finally, it's about competitiveness too. We need to empower consumers to make these responsible decisions, to choose to buy goods that actually do support conservation. And how do they know? How are these products made visible and attractive in the marketplace? How do we incentivize consumers to choose and to do the right thing? I'm just going to spend a minute talking a little bit about FairWild certification, simply because this is my organization, so it's the one I know about, and just pull out a few features that will help you to see what happens and how this works here. Well, the one thing is, so because we are in plants, it's based on compliance for wild collection operations using a full set of performance indicators. We have 12 principles, and then we have checklists of performance indicators that help the auditors to verify exactly what they should look at. It requires an annual on-site audit by a third-party control body. Many of these control bodies already do organic certifications like EcoCert, like Series, and they are well known. And I think it's a very important component that they are well known and that they have acceptability in the market space. Bear in mind, some of the clients, some of the big companies that are buying these products are buying mostly organic. They're only buying a small proportion wild harvested, and this will be as true in meat as it is in plants, and therefore we need to make it easy to them. They need to know that they can trust this control body. So thirdly, you have to look at a continuous improvement approach. When people come in, they can meet the minimum criteria, and we need to help and support them to increase their score. We do it over a 5-year period, but it's whatever suits. And finally, and this gets back to this again, this essential uniqueness of being in the wild harvesting world, is that we distinguish between low, medium, and high risk species. If you are wild harvesting nettle, the stuff is abundant. It's not such a problem. If you are looking at pelargonium, it might be a medium risk thing. And there may also be high risk species. So that kind of resource assessment gets done at the beginning of the process with us, and that guides exactly how the audit has to take place. Now, when we start thinking back to this issue of the wildlife economy as a whole and the landscape approach, where we're going to go with this is 2 ways. And the one way is to think that we will probably have a multiplicity of standards, a standard for the plants, because these are global standards. You know, any company all over the globe can pick them up. A standard for meat, a standard for this, a standard for that, and how we have to think about how those different standards can work together most effectively, such that we have this thriving wildlife economy that generates all those outcomes, conservation and inclusion and social well-being at the same time. We can't simply be competing for resources. We can't just coexist. We have to start with communication. We need to cooperate. We need to harmonize. And we have to think ultimately through collaboration how we can merge or maybe just integrate what we do into a fully integrated program that supports that landscape as a whole. So that working together is very, very important. But the other element are the opportunities for other certification schemes. At this point, we have the FairWild, the wild harvested plants. We're the only ones that really do that. And I know that for game meat, I've been talking with Greg Martindale of Conservation Outcomes, and he's worked very, very hard on developing a standard, particularly from the technical aspects for game meat. And, I think he'll be taking that forward. We're hoping to work together with him to do that shortly. But there still needs to be a whole series of wild harvesting standards for things like mopani worms, wild honey, other game products, fur, all sorts of things. So we need to be thinking about these things. We need to think how we can take them forward. Even process certifications need to be thought about. Now, the Professional Hunters Association of South Africa, for example, has a hunting protocol, which is great. So if you have a landscape that you have responsibility for, you could think about how to integrate the plants, the game meat, and the hunting protocols within that. We need to think how we are going to fill these gaps and how we are going to generate and empower wildlife economies that thrive. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm available for questions at any time. Contact me at any time. Thank you.